She thought she had life figured out. Love? That was a fairy tale for hopeless romantics. Loyalty? A word poor people clung to when they had nothing else but power, wealth, status? Now that was real. That was tangible. That was something she could wrap around her finger like the diamonds she was about to own. Emily stood in front of the mirror, her reflection shimmering under the soft glow of the bedroom lamp. Behind her, Jake, her husband, the man who swore to love her until the end of time, sat on the edge of the bed staring in disbelief. "Emily, please tell me this is a joke." His voice was thick with desperation. She smirked, slowly removing her wedding ring, rolling it between her fingers. "Jake, let's be honest. You never really believed I was meant for a simple life, did you?" His jaw clenched. "We built this together, you and me." She let out a soft, almost pitying laugh. "Built what, Jake? A life of struggling? Coupon clipping? Driving that same old rust bucket while other women like me, are being worshipped?" She turned, stepping closer, her perfume wrapping around him like a final goodbye. "I love you, in my own way. But love doesn't pay for first-class flights or diamond bracelets." His face twisted in disbelief. "So that's it? You're leaving me for him?" Him! The man she had met just 6 months ago. The man who had promised her the world wrapped in gold. Sheikh Hassan was powerful, draped in designer suits that cost more than her entire apartment. He smelled of oud and arrogance, and his words dripped like honey laced with poison. "Come with me, Emily. Be the queen you were meant to be." Jake was still waiting for an answer, his eyes pleading, searching for a trace of the woman he married. Emily leaned in, pressing a single kiss to his lips, soft, lingering, final. Then she placed her wedding ring on the nightstand. "Goodbye, Jake." A sleek black car was waiting outside, its engine humming like a promise. The driver opened the door, and Emily stepped in, sinking into the buttery leather seats. The moment the door closed, she exhaled sharply, her heart pounding. Was it nerves? Excitement? She didn't know. The car pulled away, leaving behind the small, quiet life she had once shared with Jake, the house that smelled of fresh coffee and lazy Sunday mornings, the man who would have moved mountains for her. But Emily wasn't looking back. She was only looking forward to a future dripping in wealth, luxury, and indulgence. She was finally getting what she deserved. Or so she thought. Dubai was everything she had imagined, and more. The skyline glittered like a jewel, towering glass buildings reflecting the golden sun, private chauffeurs, infinity pools, a closet that stretched wider than her entire apartment back home. This was the life she had always dreamed of. Sheikh Hassan treated her like a queen. At first, she was adorned in designer dresses, draped in diamonds that felt cool against her skin. Private jets flew her to Paris for breakfast, Milan for lunch, and back to Dubai for extravagant parties that stretched until dawn. Every woman envied her, every man desired her. And yet, beneath the silk sheets and champagne kisses, something felt off. It started small. The way his grip on her wrist lingered a second too long when she spoke to another man. The way his charming laughter would turn cold the moment they were alone. Then the rules came. "No phone calls without my permission, Emily. No leaving the penthouse unless I say so. No friends. You are mine now." His voice was always smooth, but his words coiled around her like a serpent, tightening, squeezing. She laughed it off at first. He's just protective, right? But the golden cage was closing in. One evening, she tried to withdraw some money, declined. Her credit cards, frozen, her jewelry, locked away in a safe she no longer had access to. She wasn't a wife, she wasn't a lover, she was a possession, and possessions don't get to make decisions. Sheikh Hassan had moved on, of course. There were other women now, younger, fresher, their eyes still sparkling with the same naive excitement she once had. Emily was nothing more than an ornament collecting dust. She lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling, the air too thick, the silence too loud. She could still hear Jake's voice in her head. "We built this together, you and me." She had thrown him away like an old handbag. Now she was the discarded one. That night, she made a choice. She slipped out of the penthouse with nothing but a silk robe draped over her body. The housekeeper, one of the only people who still had a shred of sympathy for her, handed her a wad of cash and whispered, "Run!" Emily ran. Through the streets of Dubai, barefoot, breathless, her once glamorous life reduced to nothing but memories and regret. It took everything she had to return. She stood in front of the house she had abandoned, her heart hammering against her ribs. Would he even open the door? She knocked. Seconds passed. Then the door creaked open. Jake stood there staring at her. He looked different, stronger, happier, thriving. Emily swallowed hard. "Jake, Then she saw her. A woman, stunning, radiant, wearing her old wedding ring, stepped beside him. Emily's breath hitched. Jake's eyes were cold now. "You wanted more," he said. "So did I." And then the door closed, leaving Emily in the cold, alone. Because karma never forgets. Emily stood frozen, the weight of Jake's words crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "You wanted more, so did I." The door had shut, sealing her fate with the finality of a coffin lid. The house that once smelled of fresh coffee and warm kisses was no longer hers. The man who once traced his fingers along her skin like she was the most delicate thing in the world now looked at her as if she was a stranger. No, worse, a mistake. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the door again, pressing her palm against the wood, desperate to turn back time. But there was no turning back. Jake had moved on. And she? She had nowhere left to go. 1 year earlier, Dubai had been a dream at first, a whirlwind of golden sunsets, rooftop champagne toasts, and silk sheets softer than the lies she told herself. Sheikh Hassan had swept her off her feet like a storm, whispering promises of forever, draping her in riches that would make queens envious. She thought she had won. But fairy tales have villains, and in this one, she wasn't the princess, she was the pawn. The first time it happened, it had been subtle, a grip too tight on her arm when she laughed a little too long at another man's joke. A quiet warning whispered in her ear, "You belong to me now, Emily." She had brushed it off, calling it passion. Obsession was flattering, right? The second time it wasn't so subtle. A gala, a sea of high society, swirling in gowns that cost more than her old apartment back home. She had been speaking with a billionaire from London, harmless small talk about art and travel. And then, suddenly, Sheikh Hassan was at her side, his hand clamping onto hers like a vice. His lips curved into a charming smile for the crowd, but his grip told a different story. That night, there was no laughter, no champagne, no luxury, only darkness and whispered threats. "You don't speak to other men. You don't make a fool out of me. You don't forget your place." That was the night she realized she wasn't living a dream. She was trapped in a nightmare. The descent, the rules became chains. No calls, no freedom, no life beyond the walls of the penthouse that had once felt like a palace, but now felt like a prison. Her phone? Gone. Her credit cards? Blocked. Her voice? Worthless. And when she cried, when she begged for a sliver of the love he once promised, he would laugh. A cold, hollow sound. "You left your husband for this life, didn't you?" He traced a diamond necklace around her neck, his grip tightening. "You got exactly what you wanted." And he was right. She had chased money. She had abandoned love. And now money was all she had. But money doesn't hold you at night. Money doesn't whisper, "I love you," in the dark. Money doesn't save you when you realize you've sold your soul. It took 6 months to gather the courage. She didn't plan it. There was no grand strategy, just a moment, a window of opportunity. He was away on business, and the housekeeper, kind, silent, knowing, pressed a thick envelope of cash into her hands. "You run," the woman whispered. "Run before it's too late." So she did. She ran through the streets of Dubai, barefoot, hair wild, silk robe fluttering like a ghost of the woman she used to be. She ran until her legs burned, until the air clawed at her lungs. She bought the first plane ticket she could afford, and she came home. The night air was cruel against her skin. Emily took a shaky breath, staring at the closed door in front of her. The place where she had once been a wife, a partner, loved. And now? Now she was nothing. She had imagined this moment 100 times during sleepless nights in the Sheikh's penthouse. She thought she would knock. Jake would open the door, his eyes softening with old love, pulling her into his arms. But fairy tales don't exist. Not for women like her. She had thrown Jake away like an old handbag, trading him for silk sheets and diamonds. Now she was the discarded one. Her fingers curled into fists. She wouldn't walk away. Not without a fight. Emily lifted her chin. Knocked again. A moment passed, then the door opened just a crack. Jake. His face was calm, too calm. His blue eyes, once filled with love, were now unreadable. She swallowed, forcing her voice not to shake. "Jake, I need to talk to you." A pause. Then he sighed, stepping aside. 5 minutes. It was enough. She stepped inside, inhaling deeply. It still smelled the same. Warm, familiar. Like home. Like him. And then her eyes landed on her. The woman. Beautiful. Serene. Wearing her old wedding ring. The world tilted. Emily's breath hitched, a sharp dagger slicing through her chest. "You're married?" Her voice came out softer than she intended. Jake exhaled. "Not yet." Not yet. A second chance, a window of hope. She turned to him, stepping forward, reaching for his hand. "Jake, I made a mistake. I was blind. I thought I needed more, but His hand pulled away before she could touch him. She froze. Jake's jaw tightened. "I loved you, Emily. I gave you everything. And you threw me away like I was nothing." She shook her head, desperation creeping into her voice. "No, Jake, You wanted more." His voice was cold now. "So did I." A lump formed in her throat. "I can fix this." He let out a breath, something almost like pity flickering in his eyes. "Some things can't be fixed." Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, he reached for the other woman's hand, lacing their fingers together. Emily's heart crumbled. Jake had moved on. And she? She had lost. Truly, finally, lost. As she stepped out into the cold night, the door closing behind her, one truth echoed in her mind. Karma never forgets. Emily staggered away from the door, her breath shallow, her world spinning. She had imagined this moment for months, rehearsed every possible outcome in her mind. She thought Jake would hesitate, that he would see her and remember the love they had built. She believed there was a chance, just a sliver of hope, that he would take her back. But reality had other plans. The sight of another woman in her home, wearing her ring, holding his hand, it was a slap that stung more than any insult ever could. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, though the night wasn't cold. The past was clawing at her, whispering all the choices that had led her here. She had walked away from a man who adored her, believing she deserved more. But what was more? A penthouse she was never allowed to leave? A man who controlled her like a puppet? A life wrapped in gold but empty of warmth? She had traded love for luxury, and in the end, she had lost both. Her feet moved before her mind could catch up. One step, then another. She walked aimlessly through the quiet streets, past the neighborhood where she once belonged. The memories came like ghosts, Jake laughing as he fixed the leaky sink, her curling up next to him on the couch, their whispered conversations late into the night. It had all seemed so ordinary back then, too simple, too plain. She had convinced herself she was meant for something greater, something grander. But now, she realized, ordinary was beautiful. It was safe. It was real. Her fingers itched for a cigarette, something to distract her from the ache in her chest, but she had nothing. No phone, no money, No home? The irony was bitter. She had once been a woman draped in diamonds, and now she didn't even have enough for a cup of coffee. She reached a park bench and sank onto it, exhaling shakily. Her reflection in the dim glow of a streetlight was almost unrecognizable. The woman who had once strutted through life, dripping in confidence, was now a shadow of herself. Hollow eyes, trembling lips, regret weighing on her like an anchor. Somewhere in the distance, a couple walked past, their hands intertwined, lost in their own little world. It was a sight so simple, so effortless, yet it cut through her like a knife. Once upon a time, that had been her and Jake, back when she hadn't been so blind. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to cry. What was the point? Tears wouldn't change the past. They wouldn't bring Jake back. They wouldn't erase the choices she had made. But what now? She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She could go back to Dubai, crawl back to Sheikh Hassan, beg him to take her back. But the thought made her stomach churn. That life had been suffocating, a golden prison. She would rather be broke, alone and free than return to that nightmare. She closed her eyes, tilting her head back against the bench. For the first time in years, she had no plan, no schemes, no safety net, just herself, raw and exposed to the consequences of her own choices. And maybe that was the real punishment. Not the loss of money, not the loss of luxury, but the loss of something far greater. The love she had thrown away, and the knowledge that she would never, ever get it back. Before we dive into the final chapter of Emily's story, take a second to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more gripping stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Because karma? Oh, she never forgets. Emily sat on the park bench, staring at the dark sky above her. The city lights blurred through the tears she refused to let fall. Somewhere, in another life, she had been happy. She had been loved. She had a man who looked at her like she was his entire world, and she had walked away from it. For what? A fleeting fantasy of silk sheets, champagne, and luxury that had turned into a nightmare. A cold gust of wind rushed past, making her shiver. She had nowhere to go. She could try a hotel, but with what money? She had nothing. No phone, no credit card, no plan. The reality of her situation settled in like a stone sinking to the bottom of the ocean. What now? She could go back to Dubai, crawl back to Sheikh Hassan, apologize, beg, promise to be the obedient doll he wanted. But just the thought of it sent a chill down her spine. No, that wasn't an option. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Her stomach twisted, hunger gnawing at her insides. She hadn't eaten all day. Was this what rock bottom felt like? The irony of it all almost made her laugh. A year ago, she was dining in the finest restaurants, eating meals plated with gold flakes. Now, she was a woman sitting on a park bench with nothing but regret to keep her company. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. She had to do something. Sitting here, wallowing in her own mistakes, wouldn't fix anything. She needed a plan. But there was only one person left in this world who might still have a shred of sympathy for her. Her sister. Emily hesitated before knocking on the door. It had been years since she last saw her sister, Claire. They had never been close. Emily always looked down on Claire's quiet, stable life. A husband, a modest house, 2 kids. Emily had mocked it, called it boring. But now, that boring life looked like paradise. The door opened. Claire stood there, wrapped in a robe, her eyes narrowing the moment she saw Emily. "Oh, it's you." Emily forced a smile. "Hey, sis." Claire crossed her arms. "What do you want?" The words cut deeper than Emily expected. "Can we talk?" Claire sighed but stepped aside, allowing Emily in. The house was warm, filled with the soft hum of late-night television and the distant sound of a child's laughter. It smelled like cinnamon and home, something Emily hadn't felt in a long time. She sat on the couch, feeling out of place. Claire sat across from her, waiting. Emily exhaled. "I messed up." Claire raised an eyebrow. No kidding. Emily swallowed. I need help. Silence. Then Claire sighed. You want a place to stay? Emily nodded slowly. Just for a little while, until I figure things out. Claire studied her for a long moment. Then she got up, walked to a drawer, and pulled something out, a $100 bill. Emily blinked. What's this? Claire placed it on the table between them. That's all I can offer. A lump formed in Emily's throat. Claire, please. Claire shook her head. I have a family to protect. I love you, Emily, but I'm not going to let you waltz into my life and bring whatever mess you've created with you. Emily's fingers clenched. I have nowhere else to go. Claire's expression softened. And whose fault is that? Silence stretched between them. Emily wanted to argue, to defend herself. But what was there to say? Everything Claire said was true. She had made this bed, and now she had to lie in it. What do you think? Should Claire have helped her sister? Or did Emily get exactly what she deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from you. Emily left with nothing but the $100 bill and the weight of her own failures. She found a cheap motel, a dingy little place that smelled of stale cigarettes and lost hope. It was a far cry from the luxury suites she once called home. But at least it had a bed. Lying there, staring at the cracked ceiling, she thought about Jake. About how once upon a time she had everything. Not money, not riches, but love. And she had thrown it away like it was worthless. Now, she was the worthless one. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under. For the first time in a long time, she didn't dream of gold. She dreamed of a man who once loved her and a life she could never get back. The next morning, Emily woke up with a plan. She couldn't undo the past, but she could try to fix her future. The first step? A job. Any job. She walked into a diner, her stomach growling at the smell of bacon and coffee. The manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked her up and down. Ever waitressed before? Emily shook her head, but I learned fast. The woman handed her an apron. You start today. And just like that, the woman who once dined with millionaires was now serving pancakes and black coffee to truck drivers and college students. It was humiliating. It was humbling. It was real. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild. She found a tiny apartment, just big enough for a mattress and a second-hand coffee table. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And one evening, as she wiped down tables, a familiar face walked in. Jake. Her breath caught. He looked good, happy, settled, a man who had found peace. And beside him, her, the woman wearing Emily's old ring. Jake glanced her way, their eyes locking for just a second. Emily swallowed, forcing a small smile. Jake gave her a polite nod. No hate, no anger, just closure. He took his seat, laughing at something his fiancée said, not sparing Emily another glance. And that's when it hit her. This was the end. Jake had moved on, for real this time. And now? It was time for her to do the same, because karma never forgets. If there's one lesson from Emily's story, it's this. Don't chase illusions. Appreciate what you have before it's gone. Hit subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And if you made it this far, tell me in the comments, did Emily deserve redemption? I'll be reading every single one.